Welcome. I appreciate you guys coming in. Got a few kind of ground rules I want to just kind of set with you. You know, they talk about public speaking being like way up on the list of things that you fear. I don't really fear it all that much anymore, but I do have a specific style that I'd like to kind of adhere to, and that's open forum. So we're all here to kind of learn about this stuff. So if you see something, don't wait until the end. There's only 26 slides. So we've got 45 minutes, 26 slides, and honest to goodness, I don't really need them. I think I've got a pretty good story to tell. But if you see something that you know, puts that light bulb on, raise your hand or jump up in the air or say something, and by all means, just I'll stop and we'll talk about it right then, because I don't want it to get lost in the shuffle of something that I think is important, because it's not about what I think is important. It's about getting you the information that you need. I mean, you're here for a reason, so let's get you what you need out of this presentation. One more note. How many friends do I have from No Name? One guy is willing to raise his hand. Two guys. Okay. All right. Well, I've got a headache this morning because of that guy. So we had a good time last night, and I wish you would all come out. Out on Main Street. It was a real good time. Next year, look for the No Name. I'll try to be there again, and we'll have us a big time just like last night. That's me, John Hayes. Phone number's up there. You're going to get a copy of this, of course, in your handouts. So if you don't have a question now, but as you're reading through it, as you're looking at it, give me a call. I'll be more than happy to pick up the phone, not just on automating the conventional, which we're, of course, excited about, but about any application within the AGV industry. Sometimes we find that people are afraid to ask questions because they don't know enough about what they want to ask, so they'll feel stupid. It's my job to kind of educate you a little bit and move you forward. So what we are here to talk about, though, outside of just AGVs in general, is automated guided vehicles use into the conventional warehouse. So what we've really tried to do here, we had to come up with a topic, I guess. But the topic was, how do we get from where we were with AGVs, which is a traditional horizontal movement, to technology that could be moved into the warehouse, and moving that all the way through to ROI, why it wasn't used in the warehouse, why we went in the warehouse, why the vendor or the customer wanted to go into the warehouse, all the way then through at the end to a user profile. So if you fall asleep, that's fine. Wake up for the end, because we have a user profile at the end with actual hard numbers. And we didn't make those up, so they came from the user. So you're going to see two user profiles at the end with real, not the return on investment numbers, but the matrix that they used based on the cost of the equipment, so to determine how they figured out what the best way to automate their warehouse was. Let's start way back. Historically, of course, horizontal transport. What you see in the back there, that's an HK40, which is an Eagle type vehicle. So historically, AGVs were used in manufacturing and distribution. Think, probably you all have seen this, picking from a production line, a palletizer taken to a stretch wrapper. Everybody seen that? So once they got into the warehouse, though, what did we do with them? We either sat them on the floor, or we put them in deep lane, or we did something, and generally a manual fork truck would pick it and then put it in some racking or some flow through or something like that. The next step was, hey, let's automate that warehousing function. And we went from AGVs delivering to a manual fork truck to putting a piece of equipment in a building, so an automated storage and retrieval machine. So somewhere in the middle, we kind of lost, you know, the focus. It said, well, why don't we go in the warehouse? Why don't we put an AGV in the warehouse? Well, as we move forward here, you're going to see that the technology wasn't there. It just wasn't there initially. There were return on investment things. There were all kinds of issues that didn't allow us to get into that narrow rack aisle. And by warehousing, I should probably preface this just a little bit. We're talking about three different types. We're talking about very narrow aisle, which is 72-inch rack aisles with standard pallets, standard post and beam racking. We're talking about manufacturing and distribution, which is coming from manufacturing. So this regular distribution, in the door, in the rack, out the door, manufacturing and distribution. And then the more traditional AGV type, which is kind of the middle portion of where we started, which is a manufacturing distribution, but not with a very narrow aisle, but with a narrow aisle. And we can do that with standard AGVs. And we can actually show you some of that a little bit later. Oh, I better address at least the slide a little bit. I'm sorry. Okay, first AGV is limited by technology. Quick question. What's the oldest AGV system anybody here has ever seen? I mean, 1990? What? Okay. Fair enough, fair enough. Well, the original AGV systems, and this is great, kind of a primer on AGVs in general, the original AGV systems were called smart floor dumb AGV systems. Some people still say AGVs are dumb, not me. I love them, and I hope you guys will too when we're done. But they were really relay-based controls, which meant the AGV followed a wire in the floor. But at the time, and this was like in the mid-50s, there was a company called Barrett that came out with a tugger. It was really like a milk route. So to expand on that, they said, well, how do we get this thing to go where we want it to go rather than go in a circle? So what they did is they just used standard controls on the vehicle and then used a relay panel to turn the floor on and off. When the floor turned off or the wire turned off, the vehicle stopped. Everything stopped. The next wire would come on and it would follow that wire. Okay. Certainly you can't do what we're talking about today with that technology. The next thing that happened is guidance evolved, and we went from wire guidance to inertial guidance, which you see in the back with the Eagle vehicle, to now laser guidance, and the accuracies have come down to in the millimeter range. 5 millimeters, 10 millimeters, that sort of thing, depending on the speeds of the vehicles. But the accuracy wasn't there in the beginning to get into a narrow aisle. Imagine, if you will, a 48-inch pallet going into a 72-inch aisle. Seems like plenty of room, correct? What happens if you turn a pallet 60 degrees? Now, you don't have an awful lot of room. If you've got a guidance technology that'll only go plus or minus 3 inches, you've got a real problem. You're going to be knocking racks down. That's not good for anybody. And then you had limited interface capabilities. And really what that means is pretty much everybody here that's got a warehouse in some form or another tracks inventory, WMS system, something like that. Early in the lifespan of this, those things weren't really set up to be able to communicate to external systems. Now it's very simple to do. So that's what we mean by this. Really the technology from where we started, not me, I'm not nearly old enough to know a Barrett system, but has evolved to a point where now it's starting to make some sense. But here's the thing. We got to the point where we could do it. It made sense. But about 15 years ago, when we did our very first one, you couldn't justify it. It just was not justifiable. The equipment was expensive. It was bleeding edge at the time, not leading edge. It was bleeding edge. And the cost of labor was very low. So you put a person on a forklift, and he drives around and does what he does, and you can have 3 shifts of 4 guys, and they just do it. And you couldn't meet the return on investment calculations. When we get to the end, you'll actually see that now you can. But there were other things as well. Initially, when people looked at AGVs, and people do like AGVs, they're excited about them. They like the fact that we can automate the transport. It's got all kinds of benefits. But the first thing they do is hit the low-hanging fruit, which I'm a huge proponent of. Let's keep it simple. Let's use the KISS principle. We'll leave the last S off. But we want to hit that low-hanging fruit, and that low-hanging fruit was horizontal transportation. You remember that from the beginning? So we got in the warehouse, but we just stopped at the door. So kind of the impetus for this, as I was thinking through how are we going to put this presentation together, I got this whole thing, why stop at the door? And everybody I showed that to said, what does that mean? I don't know. It just popped into my head. But literally what it meant was we would go through the door, stop and drop, and go away. That's why we didn't do anything there, because at the end of the day, it always came back to return on investment. There are a lot of other benefits, but you still have to get somebody to buy in on the return.